hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 129 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday afternoon with me here in New York. If you're checking out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, or enjoying the content, click like, subscribe, share, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're checking out this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. So today is the 49th anniversary of a heavyweight title fight, boxing. There really wasn't that great of a fight, if we're being honest. It's not really about the fight. It's what massive chunk of popular culture, still ongoing 49 years later, sprung from this one seemingly insignificant night in the life of one of the most extraordinary figures of the 20th century. The night was March 24, 1975. The fight took place in Ohio. The combatants were the undisputed world heavyweight champion, Muhammad Ali, who was already well past his prime, but he had just won the heavyweight title in his previous fight, had regained it. He was a master showman. Even if his skills were not what they had been, he was a master showman. And that's an important point to remember. He wasn't just a guy fighting, defending his title. And his opponent was a man with as great of a nickname as any boxer has ever had. Chuck Wepner was from Bayonne, New Jersey. He had a tendency to puff up and get cut very easily, and they called him the Bayonne Bleeder. And on that night, March 24, 1975, the idea was it was supposed to be an easy fight. Everyone was happy in the sport of boxing that Ali had gotten the title back. That was the incredible fight with George Foreman. It was actually his previous fight, I guess about 6 months prior. That was late October of 74. The so-called Rumble in the Jungle, top 5 most famous fights, if not the most famous fight in the history of boxing. And the Wepner fight was supposed to be, a way for Ali to have a nice night, easy night, entertain the fans, and go home. Figured that he would have to face Foreman again, or perhaps even Joe Frazier for a third time. Let's have an easy fight. And the fight itself is unmemorable, except for the fact that in the 9th round, Chuck Wepner was fouling. There are moments that are somewhat comical that the two guys are hitting each other with rabbit punches, like punching behind each other's head. There's a moment early in the fight where Chuck throws about 6 rabbit punches at Ali. And Ali was not known as a dirty fighter. He used to do this thing where he would kind of wrestle with his opponent and push his neck down. But he was not known as a dirty fighter. And Chuck was throwing these rabbit punches. And Ali, bitched to the ref. The ref didn't see it or didn't do anything. So Ali started throwing rabbit punches. And you hear the crowd get cracking up because each guy is like throwing shots that are completely illegal. And the ref's just letting it go. I don't know what was going on there. In the 9th round of this fight, and bear in mind, you're watching on TV, even seeing it live, in person or on TV, when there's a knockdown, you're not always going to know what happened. And many of you who are big fight fans, in 1996, in the first fight between Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson, there was a moment, and I want to say the 6th or 7th round, I think it was the end of the 6th round, where Tyson is dropped. And it appears to be a heavy knockdown. The place is going crazy. Nobody saw a punch. And then Tyson gets up and he's looking around like, what the fuck just happened? And it turned out it was sort of a balance where Tyson was off balance and Holyfield kind of almost poked him in the chest. And as they said, it was a balance shot. It wasn't really a clean knockdown. You're normally not going to knock a guy down with a shot to the, up here. So in the 9th round of the Ali Wepner fight, the champ even though he didn't look particularly sharp and there was a lot of rough housing, and as I say, the crowd was being entertained by some of the rough housing. In the 9th round, out of nowhere, Ali went flying. And the place went crazy. They went fucking nuts because nobody could see it. Did he get hit? Is Chuck gonna win? You know, all of this stuff in a few seconds. So Ali goes down and he looks pissed off. He jumps back up, and then when the round is over, Chuck Wepner goes back to his corner and they're cheering, and they didn't see a shot. So, you know, his chief second says, "What did you hit him with?" And Wepner says something like, I'm not sure that I hit him. I know I stepped on his foot though. You can see a picture of Chuck stepping on Ali's foot. And, you know, he definitely landed something, but Ali fell because he got tripped. He went down. The ref didn't see it. So then the joke was, Wepner in his corner, they looked across the ring and Chuck said something like, well, it looks like he's mad now. And one of the guys in the corner said, well, I'm glad I'm not going out there. So Ali ended up stopping Chuck near the very end of the 15th round. And, you know, I've seen the footage. It looks like the ref simply stops the fight because Wepner really is not in any shape to continue. More like a TKO than a KO because, if you see it, Chuck goes down and he almost is between the ropes. And as he's trying to pull himself up, he seems to stumble and the ref is waving the fight over. And I feel like the ref's count was at 7 or 8, but he just decided this guy's had enough. You know, so I think it's officially listed TKO, KO 15. It doesn't matter. He wasn't going to win the fight. He wasn't going to, you know, get up with 30 seconds left and land some kind of George Foreman home run bomb and win the title. But the idea of a club fighter, a nobody, a no-name who was tough, and Wepner wasn't just a random guy. He had fought Sonny Liston years earlier. Sonny really cut him up. That was one of the reasons with the nickname made sense. And Sonny was also well past it. Sonny was coming to the end of the line. Unfortunately, he died not long after the Chuck Wepner fight. But Wepner was somebody who had been in with the best. And even an older Sonny Liston was still fucking lethal. I mean, he was still an active, you know, combatant and participant in the heavyweight championship picture around the time that he fought Chuck Wepner. He wasn't some sort of old geezer that they send him out there as a sacrificial lamb. He carved up Chuck Wepner. He beat Wepner a lot easier than Ali beat Wepner. But as this fight ended, and according to legend, and there's no reason to dispute this because all the involved parties have said this is what happened, a young actor. Now, we can call him a struggling actor. The sort of fairy tale version of this part of the story, why this day is so important. Sylvester Stallone watched the Ali Wepner fight. Not surprisingly, young Sly was a fan of boxing. He was an Ali guy. He had followed him from earlier in his career, and I don't know if he had attended any of his fights. Did he go to the first fight against Frazier or the second? I don't know. But he watched the fight, and he got the idea for what became Rocky from watching Ali Wepner. And so, again, the fairy tale version of this is that Stallone is starving and broke, penniless actor, writes this script and becomes a huge star. It's okay to say that he may have been struggling, but he had been in some big movies already. He may have been not doing financially that great. And Dustin Hoffman, when the movie The Graduate came out, he was still collecting unemployment. He wasn't making shit. But it's an interesting point of fact to note that if you look at Sylvester Stallone's early career, he has 3 big movies on his resume before Rocky. The first one was a cameo, and you got to give props, whether you like this guy, whether you hate him, you think he's horrendous. Woody Allen cast a very young, he's about 23 or 24, Sylvester Stallone in one of his early movies, the kind of anything for a laugh shtick that Woody pulled at this point of his career, a movie called Bananas. And Stallone it's a quick role. He's like Thug on Subway or whatever they call him in the credits. And all he does is basically, because he's twice the size of Woody's a little guy. And he menaces Woody Allen, or seemingly menaces him on the subway, and it's fucking hilarious scene. So he probably didn't make any money from that. But, and this is something that Quentin Tarantino talked extensively about in the Stallone documentary, which is on Netflix. It's not as good as the Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary, his buddy, but it's good. The Sly documentary is absolutely worth seeing. And Quentin Tarantino talks about the next sort of big movie that Stallone was in before Rocky, The Lords of Flatbush. That movie kind of set the stage for Happy Days because Henry Winkler, the Fonz, has the same kind of jacket that he wears in Happy Days, which obviously those were all released around the same time. But Stallone plays a big character. This is not a quick cameo. He has a significant role in that film, enough of a role where Quentin Tarantino said, I was, a little kid when I watched this movie. That's the guy I wanted to be like. That's who I focused on. And that's an actor. Okay, Sylvester Stallone. And again, Tarantino with his presumably 170 or 80 IQ logged it in his head. That's someone to watch. And Quentin was, he's a kid. He was a young kid, but already had that active imagination. So that's a movie that Sly made that was successful, limited. It wasn't a huge hit, but it's a movie that's very well remembered. And Perry King, who was technically the star, went on to have a pretty good career. He played the vice president, if you remember the disaster film, The Day After Tomorrow, with the very young Jake Gyllenhaal and Dennis Quaid. Perry King plays the vice president, who I think gets swept up by the storm. Sorry, spoilers. But then Sly did another movie that was a big movie, where he also had a significant role, the movie Farewell, My Lovely, which is an adaptation of Raymond Chandler's famous Philip Marlowe novel, and big cast. Robert Mitchum played Philip Marlowe, Charlotte Rampling played the kind of damsel in distress, femme fatale character, and Sly plays he plays a goon, but he's in a number of scenes. So his career was not like, oh my God, this guy is doing great, but he was already respected within the industry in certain quarters, and certainly people responsible for, are we going to make such and such a movie? Who are we going to cast? If you're at that level, they knew who he was. Now, I'm sure there were plenty of people that couldn't have identified him in a lineup. But in other words, if you're in the business, if you walk in with a script and they say, oh, who's this kid that's coming in with the script? He played so-and-so, Lords of Flatbush. Oh, most people would have known him from that movie because certainly people in the business had seen it. And many of them thought it was terrific. It's a movie that's now, again, 50 years old, but very well remembered. As Quentin Tarantino pointed out, it's a kind of a sleeper and a movie that if you check out now, yes, it's dated, but it's good. And you see Stallone has something different, that he's not just a random, nice looking young man in his 20s wearing this kind of Fonz jacket and having his hair, combed a certain way with a lot of Brill cream or whatever it was that they were supposedly putting in their hair. So that was the Sylvester Stallone who wrote what became Rocky. He was not a complete unknown. He was unknown in some quarters, but there were parts and pieces and important people in the movie business who already knew his work and knew, they didn't know he was a writer necessarily, but he was not a complete, walking in off the street, no one knows who he is, and holy shit. So he wrote the screenplay for what became Rocky, and it was worked on, and there were adjustments made, and many studios were interested. But Stallone, and this is to his credit, he held, yes, he wanted to make money. Of course he wanted to make as much money as possible. But there were offers to him, because most people who read even the early drafts, they saw this could be great. Maybe if we soften the main character, these were the kinds of things that were talked about. But he held out. He was willing to take less money if he had the opportunity to star. And this is where him having a resume of acting credits absolutely helped. And this isn't something that you'll necessarily find in an article, but when you work it out logically in your head, if he had been a struggling actor who had 0 Hollywood credits, I don't think anybody in the business would have said, oh, sure, we'll save $100,000 on the script. We'll give this kid $15,000, but we're going to just let him star in the movie. No, it's because he had done work, recognizable. Oh, you played the guy in Farewell, My Lovely. What a great movie. Did you get to meet Robert Mitchum? These are the kinds of conversations that Sly presumably had during this particular very intense time in his life and in his career. So needless to say, he signs the appropriate deals, and now maybe he regrets that he went to work with Irwin Winkler. Robert Chartoff, I don't think that Sly had necessarily a bad relationship with. That was one of the other people involved with Rocky. But Irwin Winkler presumably paid less, but he agreed, I actually like you as an actor, kid. I think you wrote this for yourself, but I know you can do this part because I loved you in Lords of Flatbush. This is the kind of stuff. So Rocky is made. There was actually some talk. Now here's where it gets weird, because depending on what you Google, there were 3 actual boxers who were discussed for the role of Apollo Creed. One of them being Muhammad Ali, who, even though he was still a very young man, unfortunately was starting to show signs of the neurological deterioration that was unfortunately going to rule the last 4 decades of his life, more or less. And he wasn't really going to do it anyway. He didn't have time. He wanted to continue fighting, and he had a lot of kind of softball fights in the 1976 era. He fought Alfredo Evangelista. The Ken Norton fight was not an easy fight, but the point is, he wasn't going to do it. Apollo Creed was modeled after him very, very clearly. That was supposed to be a version of Ali in that movie. And I guess Rocky Balboa would have been sort of not really a Chuck Wepner, because what we're led to believe in the movie Rocky is that Rocky Balboa was a massive talent who simply hadn't worked hard enough, had not been focused properly. He seemed to be a tomato can. He appeared to be a ham and egg or a club fighter, but he actually had the talent of a top 10 fighter. And that's an important distinction that the movie, from the athletic perspective, makes it clear if we're paying attention. He's not a random guy who suddenly became great. He is someone who always had it in him to be great and did not apply himself properly, or was not directed properly because Mickey Goldmill, Mickey loves you, was focused on other fighters and didn't realize how good Rocky could be if he was directed properly and trained correctly. But that's beside the point. Ali was not going to play Apollo Creed. They talked about Joe Frazier. Frazier was a Philly guy himself, and that didn't work out. And then they talked about Ken Norton, but Ken Norton was still, he was certainly closer to his prime than either Ali or Frazier. And Norton had been in movies before, and Ken Norton was, you want to talk about a genetic superior. Ken Norton never worked out with weights during his boxing career, and he had a build like Holyfield, and he was naturally just a bigger man than Evander. Norton looked the part of a fighter. Even if he was not a boxer, he looked like a boxer. He looked like he almost could have been a bodybuilder. Like, Norton was really jacked for that era for sure. So when that didn't work out, that's when they famously ended up getting Carl Weathers, who had been a football player, briefly playing in the NFL, and he had been a college star. And they made the movie, and as we know, and I talked about it on the channel, it became an incredible, enormous success, ended up winning the Oscar for Best Picture, and Stallone famously at the Oscars was presenting, I think he was presenting the award for Best Supporting Actress, and I guess Sly was 29 at the time. What an amazing time in his young life. It's almost staggering, but he was on the Oscar stage, and they had Ali as a surprise come up on stage, and the two guys shadow boxed on stage. And it's funny, if you watch it, Ali looks like he's letting Stallone almost get a little bit of an advantage on him. And Sly is with it, and then all of a sudden, Ali starts to turn it. Sly's like, okay, we're good here. No thank you, we're all set. But it was a nice moment, and then the men embraced, and Ali said something like, I was just kidding about what I said, because he made a joke when he first got on stage, you stole my script, I'm the real Apollo Creed. But there'd be no story if there were no controversy. And Stallone always acknowledged publicly that he was inspired by the Ali Wepner fight. And the first Rocky movie, I'm sorry for spoilers, Rocky Goes the Distance. And Chuck Wepner was this close to going the distance. But the thing is, Chuck Wepner was in that fight to try to win. He wasn't trying just to get to the end of the fight. And if you watch the 15th round at YouTube, there's all kinds of different clips and packages and highlight reels from this fight. Chuck is still swinging for the fences, as exhausted as he was in the last round. He's out there trying to win the fight. And Ali was matching his energy, because there were segments of the fight where the champ appears to be carrying him. And then there were moments where if Chuck lands a shot, Ali says, what the fuck am I doing? I shouldn't be screwing around with this guy. He's a big man. What if he takes my head off with one of these shots? So Chuck is winging, and then Ali presumably says, I can't screw around with this guy. So Chuck probably could have coasted to the finish line, but he was still trying to win. And if you look at the fight, man, Ali didn't appear to be in the most spectacular condition of his life, but he's still bouncing around on his toes, dancing in the 15th round. You talk about stamina and endurance. They don't have 15-round fights anymore. He looked like he could have gone another 5 or 10 rounds. And Wepner, the joke about Chuck Wepner was, at the beginning of the fight, he looked like a guy who staggered into the ring from a bar. But that was just how he looked, with the mustache and the hair, and the fact that he looked puffy and beat up all the time. He looked like a guy who'd already had a few too many. So the unfortunate thing, just from the first movie and the sort of creation of the Rocky franchise, is that Stallone gave Wepner money at various points, but he didn't ever actually pay him a commensurate amount for the fact that it was based on him. And the inspiration was that particular fight. Now, at no time was Ali ever gonna say something, or even people connected to him. Ali had a lot of really craven assholes who worked for him during his boxing career, like really bad guys. But his family did fine. Even as his health declined, they just were making money hand over fist. The guy was so beloved in his later years, in the last 25, 30 years of his life. He was getting paid so much just to make appearances. People just wanted to be around him. I mean, you say to yourself, he made 60-something million in terms of actual purses as a fighter. And when he passed, his net worth was like 200 to 300 million. You say, how's that even possible? The man retired in 1981, his last fight. Shouldn't have gone anywhere near that long, but he was still in his 30s. How did he make so much? Because of who he was. In every sense of that term, because of who he was. They were able to market his name. And this is not a criticism. This is a reality when you have that kind of, when you have that sort of person and personality where you can make money. All he has to do is show up. Here's 500,000. Here's $1 million. Can we use your likeness for ads? You'd be surprised how many ads throughout the 90s and in the 2000s and 2010s used him. Apple, for one of their iPod ads many years ago, used some of his rhymes and his imagery. Family makes money. Everybody makes money. But the unfortunate thing is that Wepner and Stallone, although there are pictures of them embracing over time, you can Google this, you can see pictures of them in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. But at a certain point, Wepner just felt that Sly had not made good. That Sly had made a lot of promises of big payout or whatever. Again, nobody knows what goes on between two people. But finally, there was a lawsuit, and much like, and I love Sylvester Stallone, okay? He's not, for me, Clint Eastwood or Arnold Schwarzenegger, but Sly is right there in that ballpark. He is one of my favorite people to ever work in the movie business. He's in the top 10 for sure. And you hate to see when he had the very public, well, it was mostly him getting pissed off, the spat with Winkler, when Winkler was just squeezing blood from a stone with the Rocky franchise, and they were talking about doing a Drago standalone movie, and I understand why Stallone was mad. I think that he probably could have not gotten as pissed off as he did. There was a better way to do it, but that's neither here nor there. But it bothered me that he and Wepner had this problem. And they settled out of court. My assumption is that Stallone paid him somewhere between 5 and 10 million and probably apologized for not doing something like that sooner, because he could have just given Chuck a couple of million at some point in the 80s or 90s and none of this would have happened. He could have just done it quietly. So I'm sorry, I hate to see heroes look less than heroic. And one thing we know about Sly, he's talked about this, he doesn't like heroes to lose in his movies. He doesn't like their images to be tarnished. So he's very protective of the Rocky saga. And it's a reason why The most logical ending of the last Rambo film was for Johnny to die, and Stallone said, no, I don't want this man to die. He doesn't like when the good guys die at the end. And we've certainly seen, whether it's Clint or Redford or Bobby D or Pacino, there are plenty of big movies, big name actors, where they meet an unfortunate fate. Warren Beatty, they meet an unfortunate fate. And Stallone, after what he thought was a shitty experience, and it's a good movie, F.I.S.T., it's kind of his Jimmy Hoffa iteration in the late 70s, he didn't want the guy to get shot at the end. Sorry, spoiler alert. It's just a thing with him. And in this particular instance, you wish that he and Wepner had made good previously. But look, they're buddies again. You can see pictures of them in more current times. And you think of it this way. You never know where a franchise is going to start or where it's going to end. But the Rocky franchise, in its way, it's as successful as a Star Trek, a Star Wars, a Lord of the Rings. It is an incredible, enduring legacy character and series. And most of the movies are very high quality. This is a thing. Friday the 13th went on forever. Every movie sucks. There's something I'm going to go down and I'm not going to apologize. There is yet to be a Friday the 13th movie that is not a piece of shit. Halloween, great first movie. Love John Carpenter. Every other Halloween movie sucks. Nightmare on Elm Street has some good ones. The first one's great. The third one and fourth one are good. The rest of them are crap. Not into the Saw movies. I don't give a shit what anybody says. The first hour, the first one is fine. Goes off the rails. No thank you. Final Destination, I'm all set here. No thank you. But you look at the Rocky series and then the Creed series. I think all three Creed movies are great. They are all great. I would rate all three of it at least a 7 out of 10. I think the third one was probably the weakest, but they're believable, taking, cues from the original Rocky, and obviously Stallone appearing in the first two, missed him in the third one. But when you look at the Rocky series, the original Rocky is the best movie of the entire 9 films in the Rocky series. I think it's 9, yeah. Rocky 2, I don't love as much as I'm supposed to. It's good, but there's long stretches of that movie where it's not, to me, very interesting. There's at least a half hour that I can sort of snooze through. Great opening, the scenes with the guys almost bonding in the hospital because they've beaten one another to within an inch of their life, all that amazing stuff. And Carl Weathers is so good. That was an incredible, happy accident that they got that guy for that role. Because he was a great actor. He wasn't just an athlete who also acted. He was just a great actor who happened to have been an athlete. I mean, Weathers was dynamite as Apollo Creed. A perfect match of his own personal charisma and talent and what we know what this character would probably be like. Rocky 3 is absurd. Love it. Rocky 4 is a 90-minute music video, and in either version, I like Sly's director's cut that he did from a couple of years ago, toning down this sort of jingoistic us versus them crapola, that was very popular in the 80s. But that movie, I love it anyway. In either version, Rocky 4 is a fucking home run. Rocky 5 sucks. But what Rocky 5 is good for, even though Stallone it's sort of the weakest film in the entire franchise by far. But Stallone had the right idea as far as Rocky Balboa should not have had a flashy lifestyle. He would have been a guy who would have been more comfortable living in a humble kind of environment. And so the fact that Rocky doesn't have a shit ton of money, that's about the only good thing about Rocky 5. The scenes with the son don't really work. And Tommy Morrison, a great heavyweight, one of those sort of, I know he won WBO, but he was never a lineal WBC, WBA champion. He was a notch below the great fighters of his era. He was on the Razor Ruddock level. He was a huge guy who was tough and had a huge punch. That movie doesn't work, and not because of him. Sly never quite figured out the story, and he's talked about it. He actually filmed 6 weeks where Rocky, in Rocky 5, is neurocompromised, where he's speaking even slower and having more physical manifestations of the terrible beatings he's taken in the ring. In other words, it was realistic. It was realistic. But he said, I couldn't do that to this guy. So they started from scratch and they made a movie that has good elements, but other than the fact of Rocky having to go back to being humble, working from the ground up, it's not successful. And the Rocky Balboa movie, which came out in 2006, and you had Antonio Tarver, who at the time was the light heavyweight champion. He had defeated Roy Jones. I don't love that movie. It's just okay. It's just okay. I don't think it's as good as any of the first four Rockies. I don't think it's even close to any of the first four. It's better than Rocky V if we're just talking about story. It's not great. But what they did with the Creed movies and Stallone's performances in both Creed 1 and 2, and I know he got an Oscar nomination. I was hoping he would win. Both of those films were not only financial successes, but if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, the reviews for the first two Creed movies are better than any of the Rocky movies with the exception of the first one. So you start to do the math, and the first Creed film, I believe, came out in 2017. 40 years after the release of the original Rocky, you have a movie featuring that character 4 decades, and a terrific movie telling a new story with elements and characters and remembrances of characters gone. Characters still here, but doing it beautifully. There's a little bit of fan service, but there was always the sense they were still creating, and Michael B. Jordan, great actor, and Sly really gives it what he's got. He makes you believe that Rocky, yeah, he might be a little broken down. Don't fuck with this guy. He's still got the champion's heart and the guts. And this entire series, they'll probably make another Creed movie. They might do 2 more. It's whatever Michael B. Jordan wants to do because the films have been such financial successes. And you can always shoot them cheaper if you want, do different things, get unknown actors. But you think about this one insignificant fight in the extraordinary life of Muhammad Ali, and the young actor and writer, Sylvester Stallone, who happened to have time. He wasn't working that night. He could have been on a film set and not seen the fight. But he happened to be off that night. And he watches this, and the creative fires begin to burn in the brain of Sylvester Stallone. And here we are all these years later, still talking about Rocky, still wondering about, is Creed 4? So I thought Creed 3 was good. It wasn't as good as the first 2, but still absolutely worth seeing. And in terms of quality, comparable to Rocky's 3 and 4. Well, Rocky's 2, 3, and 4. I think it's better than Rocky 2, but that's just me. I'm an outlier on that one. You know, the final fight sequence in Rocky 2 is unbelievable. But the movie as a whole, That one night, October 24, 1975, in Ohio, and the fulmination, the creation, and the end of an idea. We could do a boxing script. I can do this. And Sylvester Stallone banging out this screenplay. Rough draft form, got to make the guy more likable, because the early drafts, Rocky was kind of a dick. He wasn't nice. He was less socially awkward, but he was just more of a heel. We can soften him up and still keep the core. This is a tough guy. Life's dealt him a lot of bad breaks. And you take that and you cast it perfectly with Sly himself and Carl Weathers and Talia Shire. Oh, she's Nepo. Yeah, because it's Francis Coppola's sister. She's fucking awesome. Talia Shire. Perfectly cast. And Burt Young, who could forget Burt Young? I'm the unsilent majority, Big Mouth. Top 10 great moments in 80s cinema when he screams that during the press conference of Russia at Rocky IV. I'm the unsilent majority, Big Mouth! 49 years ago today, the birth of the Rocky franchise. Thanks to Muhammad Ali, Chuck Wepner, and a brilliant young actor-writer named Sylvester Stallone. With that, We've reached the end of episode 129 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here on this Sunday in New York. If you caught this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, share, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching up with this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 130 real soon. Till then, come on, Balboa! Come on, Balboa! Peace.